Welcome to Tennessee Court Talk. I'm your host, Nick Morgan, joined by a co-host and the newest member of the AOC's communication team, Jordan Alcorn. We're happy to have Jordan on our team, and listeners will be hearing his voice and seeing his work across all our platforms. So first of all, Jordan, welcome to the team.
Glad to be here.
On this episode of Tennessee Court Talk, we are excited to welcome Judge Andrew Jackson VI to the podcast. Judge Jackson has served as a General Sessions Judge in Knoxville, Tennessee since 2006. His legal career, however, spans much farther than that, as he served 21 years as a prosecutor before being elected to the bench. On this episode, we'll be discussing Judge Jackson's legal career, growing up with a familiar name, and the legacy that comes with being the great-great-great-grandson to President Andrew Jackson. Judge Jackson, welcome to Tennessee Court Talk.
Thank you, Nick. And Jordan, it's a pleasure to be with you all.
Judge, we've only ever recorded one episode talking about General Sessions Court, so I want to start there. Can you break down what General Sessions Court is and why it's important to the legal system?
Well, General Sessions Court's usually the first court people go to in criminal cases. So it's, and often it's the only court people end up going to. So oftentimes the perception someone has of our judicial system is formed in Sessions Court. So in criminal cases, you come there for a preliminary hearing on the matters, or they can be worked out down in Sessions Court, where most cases are resolved in Sessions Court. And that's part of the purpose, is to, try to resolve the less serious matters in Sessions Court. Serious being, the level of criminal charge that's levied against someone, and leave the more serious, like the murders and aggravated robberies and aggravated rapes and those types of cases for a criminal court. Or, of course, people's entitled to have the jury trial up there, and that takes a lot more time. So we try to kind of weed everything out we can in Sessions Court and leave the more serious matters to be resolved up in criminal court. Not to say, of course, anyone's entitled to have a jury trial can take their case to criminal court, but, most cases get resolved in Sessions Court.
What would you like for people to know more about the role of a General Sessions judge?
Well, I think any judge, maybe more particularly in Sessions Court, Sessions Court is less formal than Circuit Court. It has to be. The volume of cases we deal with, lots of people don't have an attorneys. They don't want attorneys. So we're sort of the face that people see when they come to court and represent what the judicial system means to them. So it's important for us as judges to keep that in mind. Now, I found that, if you treat everybody with respect, they in turn will return that respect to you. Usually, not always. Of course, you have, people that don't. But I think if people come to court, if they think they're being treated fairly, even times when they don't win, if they think they got a fair shot when they're in court, then it gives them confidence in the judicial system. And I think that's what all judges need to strive to do, is, build up the confidence in the judicial system, because, poll after poll shows that more recently there's been a great decline in that. And I think that's bad for not just the judicial system, but society as a whole, because, we need a network of laws to keep order, in our society.
So you bring up a good point, talking about people don't necessarily want to hire a lawyer to go into court. They don't want a lawyer. Let's dig into that just a little bit. I think people are scared a lot of times, even going into sort of the court of first resort, I think it's called a lot of times. Do you have to dress up? Do you have to have a lawyer for General Sessions Court? What types of cases are we talking about? Are we talking about traffic tickets? Are we talking about something more violent? Speak about that a little bit for me.
Well, yes, those are the types of cases we do. Traffic cases, anything from, not having a tag on your car to first-degree murder, we handle in Sessions Court. And so, obviously, you expect different outcomes on those cases. So, these traffic cases, they're going to come before the judge, and at most will be a fine. In the murder cases, those are going to end up usually in a preliminary hearing where they come and, state has to put on their evidence to establish probable cause, and then it will be sent up, if they do that, sent up to the grand jury and proceed from there. And everywhere in between. So we get everybody coming into Sessions Court, all range of people coming into Sessions Court, because, you have people that you maybe associate with more of the criminal element, people that are repeat offenders and that type. But in Sessions Court, you have speeding tickets. Anybody can get a speeding ticket.
Sure.
And so you get all kinds of people coming into court. So you have people in court in three-piece suits and have people coming to court. Well, some of them, actually, we make them leave the court because they're not even dressed to our minimal standards. So you just have a whole range of society in the court. It really is a melting pot of our society.
That's sort of what I was going to ask. If, say I get a traffic ticket that requires me to come to court, or I want to come to court. If I show up in, jeans and a polo, that's okay, right?
That's
not
okay.
Gonna count against me.
No.
In my case.
No. We have a dress code. It's, I think, very lenient dress code. You can't wear shorts, flip-flops, tank tops, things like that.
Yeah. And a lot of times, especially with this podcast, we try to break down some of those barriers of people being scared. So when I talk to a general sessions judge, I try to make sure we hammer that home a little bit. Like, you don't have to be in a three-piece suit to come state your case.
No. And very seldom do we see people come into court with suits on. Oftentimes, if they have an attorney, they'll have a suit on because that's at the direction of the attorney. And how you're dressed does not make a difference on the outcome of your case as far as the judge is concerned. Now, whether in front of a jury, that might impress the jury or not. How you're dressed, I don't know.
Sure.
But as far as the judges, no, that doesn't affect any of the judges' thinking I know of. You come to court, state your case, the DA state their case. If it comes that far, like traffic tickets, most of those are worked out with the DA and between the DA and the persons that's charged with the ticket, and the agreement's announced to the judge. So, but you do not need to be afraid or concerned about not being dressed well enough for court, as long as you're using common sense in what you wear.
I briefly mentioned part of your biography in the introduction, but you worked as a prosecutor and for the Attorney General's office. Explain how that experience led to you wanting to be elected to the bench.
Okay, well, I came to the Attorney General's office. I've been practicing in private practice for about 3.5 years. Got the opportunity to come work for the Knox County DA's office, and started off doing child sex abuse cases. But then I went to juvenile court for a little while. Then I was going to go back to criminal court, and we had an opening in Sessions Court. An unfortunate incident occurred with the DA that was handling that. The assistant DA was killed, actually. And so I was put down there as a temporary matter, and how lots of times things, the temporary ends up not to be so temporary.
Sure.
And so I spent most of the rest of my career in the Attorney General's office in Sessions Court, and ended up, before I became judge, I was sort of the in-charge assistant for the Sessions Court in Knox County for the DA's office. So, of course, that gave me a lot of insight into various courts and aspects of how the different cases are handled. And so, to me, it's just like the next step up to want to be judge. And I had that opportunity in 2006, and gratefully the citizens of Knox County agreed.
A lot of appellate judges, even when they do their retention elections, don't campaign. In this kind of role, do you campaign? Is it worth campaigning?
Well, when I first ran for judge the first time, I campaigned because I had as opposition. So I had an opponent, two opponents in the primary. Then I won the primary, then had an opponent in the general election. Fortunately, after that, I've not had an opponent and therefore have not had to campaign.
Gotcha.
And one of my predecessors told me, she said, Andy, there's two ways to run an election: scared, silly, and unopposed. And she said, I found unopposed better. And she was right.
So after 19 years on the bench, is there anything that stayed with you or that you would like to share that had an impact on people that come before you?
I think, the longer I'm on the benches, the more I realize that everyone has a different story. And it's, Sessions Court sometimes it's difficult because you have so many cases coming in front of you. So it's, you need to try to find time to give everybody their individual attention. Because, I talked earlier about, serious cases. Sure, you have cases that society will consider more serious. You're usually involving, very violent acts, robberies, murders, rapes, things of that nature. But, of course, if you're charged with a traffic ticket and you're in court, that's a serious charge for you. And so we just need to try to remember that for these people that are in front of you, this is an important event in their life. So, someone doesn't have their registration on the vehicle, that's important to them. Even though, an hour later you're going to be doing a hearing on a murder case, we got to give that person the attention they deserve for their case. So when they leave here, they'll feel that they were heard, the judge listened to them, and they got a fair shake. And so I think as long as people do that, if they think they come to court, they're going to be able to tell their side, and the judge or jury is going to give their side consideration, even if they don't win, then that's a good thing.
What has challenged you the most during your time on the bench?
The thing that I found most challenging as a judge isn't the courtroom stuff. It's the stuff outside the courtroom. And that's one thing you don't realize, I believe, before you become a judge, is all the other stuff that goes on. So if you want to make a change in something in the courtroom,
right,
you can't just go, sign an order and say, this is the change. No, because you got the police department, you got the sheriff's department, you got the highway patrol, you got the wildlife resources, you got University of Tennessee Police, you got the clerk's office, you got the mayor's office for funding, you have the IT department to take care of the computer stuff. And so it's all these different stakeholders in the judicial system. And I don't think before I became judge I realized just how much that played a part in the court. It's just not the judges or the lawyers in the court. There's a whole lot of other people involved in making things go as smoothly as they do. So I think for me the greatest challenge is that. The other one I would say is, and this is becoming more and more of a problem, and I don't know why, but is the mentally ill. We have so many people in court that have some kind of mental illness, and our system is just not set up to handle that. We have so many people in jail that are in jail because they broke the law. They have some reason, a mental illness that makes it where they can't, they can't conduct themselves the way a normal person would. And it's really not their fault, but we don't have a way of handling it. Sometimes, the sheriff around here said in Knox County Jail is the biggest mental health hospital in Knox County. And I think in many ways he's right. And that's just a shame that there's not more that is being done to help that. We do actually have now a mental health court in Knox County to try to help alleviate that. But still, that's a challenge.
Yeah, those are becoming a lot more popular. I see the Supreme Court promoting them quite a bit.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing.
So I would be remiss if we obviously didn't mention your legacy. You said that most people call you Andy.
Yes.
But your name is Andrew Jackson VI. And to talk more about your legacy, I'm going to let Jordan Alcorn take over and ask questions about the 7th President of the United States.
What was it like growing up as the great-great-great-grandson of President Andrew Jackson And how old were you when you started to realize just how significant that actually was?
Well, of course, when I was young, my father told me, he said, yeah, we're related to Andrew Jackson. And, you're 6 or 7 years old or whatever. That doesn't mean much to you, really, And a little bit of family history. My father, his parents divorced when he was 7 years old. And he never saw his father again. And so he was raised by his maternal grandfather mainly. So there wasn't a lot of Andrew Jackson stuff passed on. And stuff, I mean, not artifacts or material things, but just knowledge and things of that nature passed on for that reason. And so Andrew Jackson wasn't that big of a thing in my house growing up. The first time I went to the Hermitage was a field trip in 8th grade. And, we go down to the Hermitage, and it's entirely different today, by the way. They made great improvements in the Hermitage. And so it wasn't really until I guess I got into high school I started thinking about it more, then, reading about Andrew Jackson and the things he did, and became more involved. And then as I got older, the Hermitage actually reached out to us, and I became much more involved with the Hermitage, Andrew Jackson's legacy. And so my daughters they've been more involved in Andrew Jackson's history than maybe they want to sometimes. But basically, it's been an advantage to me. It's been enjoyable. It's opened lots of doors for me. I mean, I've been to the White House a couple of times. I was in the parade down Broadway in New York. Had all the descents from presidents celebrating George Washington's 200th inauguration. So it's opened lots of doors. I met lots of people because of that. And, I just need to keep in mind, I think I do, that it's a name. And so I didn't do any of these things that he's famous for. I wasn't president. I wasn't a war hero. Any of that stuff, it's neat. It's cool. I get pleasure out of it, but I try not to let it go to my head, which isn't a concern, except sometimes when at the Hermitage, it's a bigger issue than it is now. But I tell people there, I say, me and Andrew Jackson, we're both lawyers. We both work for the DA's office. We were both judges. And he's a war hero and president, and I'm a judge. So,
I do have to ask, what was it like going on a field trip and telling someone at the Hermitage what your name was?
Well, I was 13 years old, and I didn't tell anybody.
Okay.
The people with me, of course, they knew my name. Hey, you need to, tell them your name's Andrew Jackson. Your name's Andrew Jackson. I did sign the register, Andrew Jackson the 6th. But I didn't, it's funny, in high school, my nickname for some people was Stonewall, which, of course, is absolutely no
Completely
relation to Andrew Jackson. But that's just how things are, And I get people all the time, they'll come and say, my family, we're related to Andrew Jackson. And it's usually they're not. But they think, and I just say, that's great. But we're cousins. Because, I don't want to point out that they're wrong. How does that help me any? And it makes them feel good, and they may be.
Interesting. So there are so many interesting stories from his life. Is there one specific one that sticks out to you as your favorite?
I don't know if this is my favorite. It may be my favorite one as far as being a judge. Because Andrew Jackson was a judge, and he's doing a case up in Jonesboro. And they have this guy, his last name's Bean. He's supposed to be in court, and he's not there. So Jackson says, Sheriff, where's Bean? He said, well, he's over in the inn, the pub, whatever. He didn't want to come to court. He says, well, go get him and tell him he's got to come to court. So the sheriff goes there and he comes back. He didn't want to come, Judge. He said, well, take some deputies over there and get him and bring him back. So he takes some deputies, goes over there, and still don't know Bean. Said, swear me in as a deputy. So Jackson goes over there and he said, Bean, you're going to come with me, or by God, I'm going to shoot you dead where you stand. And so Bean just bowed his head and walked over there with Andrew Jackson back to court. They asked him, I said, how come the sheriff came? You didn't go with him. He came with the deputies. You didn't come with him. And Andrew Jackson came there and you went with him. He said, well, I looked at him. When he said shoot, I saw shoot in his eyes. And I said, Bean, old boy, it's time to eat some humble pie. But I'll say this, I do not get sworn in as a deputy and go bring miscreants back into court. That is the sheriff's job, and he does a fine job of it.
Part of the folklore surrounding President Andrew Jackson was his involvement in duels to settle certain disputes. And I've heard that it's possible that he was in anywhere between 5 and 100 duels. Do you happen to know the actual number that he was involved in?
No. Now, I think that number probably comes through maybe in some duels being a Sankett or some other thing. As a primary duelist, he only shot one person. And he killed that person, a guy named Charles Dickinson. He shot that after he had been shot. They have the duel, and they say fire, and Mr. Dickinson fired first and shot Jackson in the chest. And Jackson then took aim and shot Mr. Dickinson. He died from his wounds. And Jackson kept that bullet in his chest for the rest of his life. But that's the only duel I know of where actually anyone was injured besides Jackson. Now, he got involved in a bar fight in Nashville with Thomas Hart Benton, who became a senator from Missouri later on, in which Jackson was shot once again in the arm and almost lost his arm. That could not be classified as a duel. That was where Jackson had a dispute, and Jackson a dispute over another duel in which Jackson had been a Sankett, Thomas Hart Benton, for the duelist against Thomas Hart Benton's brother, Jesse Benton. And so Thomas Hart Benton got angry at Andrew Jackson for that. And anyway, Jackson said, I'll see you in town. I'm going to take my cane out and beat you with it. And so he saw him in this tavern, and he pulls out his cane and goes to beat him with it. And Thomas Hart Benton shot him. So ended that fight. But those are only two I know of where anyone was injured. So I don't know the number. I think most of those, as I said, they did participate in would have been, like for Jesse Hart Benton in that duel, he was a Sankett to some other party. So, yeah, that's about all I know about that.
That's actually a good segue, because my next question was about Benton. So despite their political rivalry culminating in a duel, if you can call it that, Benton later became a supporter and a key ally of President Jackson's in the Senate. Can you speak to President Jackson's willingness to not hold on to political grudges despite tempers flaring to that level at a previous time?
I'm not sure I'd classify it as a political dispute. What happened was, in the War of 1812, Jackson led the troops down to what is now Mississippi and Alabama, and they didn't fight. This is the first time they didn't fight. They got an order for the War Department to come back, so they came back, and Jackson, out of his own pocket, paid money for some, because they tell you just disperse your troops there. And he says, no, I took them down here, I'm bringing them back. And so he did, and that's where he picked up the nickname Old Hickory. Because he was letting 6 soldiers ride his horse, and some of the men said, well, he's as tough as Old Hickory. Sure, they get back, so he gets Thomas Hart Benton, who was an officer under him, to go to Washington to seek reimbursement for the expenses Jackson put forth to bring the troops back. And while he's gone, Jesse Hart Benton, who was also under Jackson's command, along with another officer, got in some dispute, and they have a duel. and Jackson was a sanction for Jesse Benton's opponent. And when they said during the drill, when they said fire, evidently Jesse Benton turned or something and squatted somehow, and anyway, he got shot in the rear end, which was very funny to the people around then. Kind of funny now when you think about it. But when Thomas Hart Benton got back with Jackson's money, he felt Jackson didn't act appropriately as far as being a sanction involved with two of his people under his command. And I think he was right. Jackson should have been trying to smooth things over and, reconcile these two people instead of participating in a duel between two of his soldiers. And so that's what caused it. And then they had that, duel, if you want to say, in the tavern. And Thomas Hart and Jesse said they had to leave town because, Jackson's dogs are running them out of town or whatever. So they go to Missouri. So I always thought, I have nothing to back this up, that Jackson sort of felt maybe he was not right in the way he handled that situation. And so, yes, Thomas Hart Benton became a supporter of Jackson in the Senate. And when they had the nullification crisis of when Jackson was president of South Carolina, Jackson said, he's going to send the troops down to South Carolina, and if any one of them gets hurt, he's going to hang the first SOB he can find from the first tree he gets to. And a fellow senator asked Thomas Hart Benton, is he serious when he says that stuff? He said, let me tell you about Andrew Jackson. When he starts talking about hanging, you need to start looking for trees. So I think that as Jackson got older, especially, as many of us do, I guess, he got a better grip on his anger. And it became apparent, I think, more and more that he began to lose his temper at the times that were best for him to lose his temper. And otherwise, he could keep his temper well in check. So I think, he learned as he got older, and I think he used his temper more as a weapon than as an actual emotional outburst. Now, I think when he was younger, yes, he would have those emotional outbursts.
"I was born for the storm, and a calm does not suit me," is a quote from Andrew Jackson, which is often referred to and befitting President Jackson's life. What is one word that you would use if you had to describe President Andrew Jackson? One word.
Patriotic.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Judge Jackson, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time on Tennessee Court Talk and your service to our state.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate meeting you, and I appreciate participating in this.
To learn more about the Tennessee court system, visit tncourts.gov. Tennessee Court Talk can be found on all major podcast platforms.